Good afternoon. Oh, good afternoon. All right. It's wonderful to see you here. Really such an important conversation we're going to have and so timely. So welcome to Teachers College. I'm Janice Robinson. I'm Vice President for Diversity and Community Affairs, Associate Professor of Higher Education, and I am TC's Title IX Coordinator as well, and also a proud TC alumna. You're here today to participate in our program called Legal Challenges to Anti-Woke Laws and Book Bans. Haven't you been reading about all of this that's been going on in the country? I'd be seeing heads nod. You have to have thoughts and feelings about book bans in the United States of America. So it's important that we have this wonderful panel, which I'm going to introduce shortly. But let me just share with you that each year, to commemorate the signing of the U.S. Constitution on September 17th. Now, what year was that? September 17th. What year? Sorry, I'm imposing the Socratic method on you. 1787. So we at Teachers College, we host an educational program about the Constitution each year. And frankly, you should know that higher education institutions receiving federal funding through the U.S. Department of Education are required to hold a program pertaining to the Constitution on September 17th. However, our commitment at Teachers College isn't simply about having something about the Constitution because it's an obligation. It's really an annual event that we take a tremendous amount of pride in, and we're an educational institution, right? And it's about educating folk. And we do this in collaboration with our ongoing Democracy and Education series, which raises awareness and educates our community about our democratic process, civic participation, and social justice. So today, our panel will discuss the challenges that educators face nationwide due to the state statutory limitations on DEI curricula and the banning of literature in our school libraries and in our schools. The panel will provide an overview of laws, where the cases stand, particularly regarding the nationwide issues, practical guidance on curriculum issues, and how educators in different states can remain inclusive, considering these difficult challenges. So we are going to hear from our wonderful, and I really have to thank them for taking the time to come, and a special shout out to Professor Rebell's class. Raise your hand. All right. Let me just say this. I know I'm digressing. I know this overlaps with your class, but there's a reception. And so the part of the class will be held during the reception. But in all seriousness, let me give some brief introductions. I'm going to start with Sarah Hinger. Sarah, raise your hand. Sarah Hinger is the Deputy Director of the ACLU Racial Justice Program, where her work focuses on education and youth justice. Her recent work includes representing plaintiffs in Kinney versus Wilson, challenging a vague South Carolina law making it a crime to disturb a school. This law is applied far more frequently to Black students and was invoked in the arrest of a student and plaintiff in the case when she spoke out in protest while witnessing a classmate violently ripped from her desk by a school police officer. Prior to joining the ACLU, Sarah was a trial attorney with the U.S. State Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Division, and particularly the Educational Opportunities Center, where she received the Assistant Attorney General's Distinguished Service Award. She's litigated discrimination in English language learners. She litigated discrimination against English language learners, immigrants, and refugee students, as well as Title IX. She completed her JD at Columbia Law School and her MPhil at the University of Cambridge and her BA at the University of Virginia. Professor Sonya Douglas is professor and vice chair of the Department of Organization Leadership here at Teachers College. Her research interests include education policy, politics, leadership, school segregation and desegregation, critical race theory in education, Black and African American education and leadership for social justice. She has published more than 20 journal articles and 5 books, including Learning in a Burning House, Inequality, Ideology, and Disintegration, and the Politics of Education Policy in an Era of Inequality, Possibilities Towards Democratic Schooling. Professor Douglas also serves as the founding director of the Black Education Research Center at TC, affectionately known as BERC, which analyzes and conducts research focused on improving the educational experiences and outcomes of Black students in the U.S. and throughout the world. In this role, she serves as principal investigator of the New York City's Education Equity Action Plan, a $25 million initiative funded by the New York City Council for the development of the Black Studies curriculum and professional learning plan for the New York City public schools. She also has a long resume, and we are thrilled that she is here. Her current research focuses on executive and system level leaders, and their. So that's Professor Sonya Douglas, and our last but not least is Professor Michael Rebell. Michael is an experienced litigator, administrator, researcher, and scholar in the field of education law. He is the executive director of the Center for Educational Equity and professor of law and education practice at Teachers College. The center seeks to promote equity and excellence in education and to overcome the gap in educational access and achievement between advantaged and disadvantaged students throughout the United States. Mr. Rebell is also a convener of the Democracy Ready New York Coalition, a partnership of civic and education groups throughout the state that promotes improvements in civic education. Previously, Professor Rebell was the co-founder and executive director and counsel for the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. In CFE versus the State of New York, the Court of Appeals, New York State's highest court, declared that all children are entitled under the state constitution to, quote, an opportunity for sound basic education, close quote. And it ordered the State of New York to reform its educational finance system to meet these constitutional requirements. There are additional cases in which he's involved. Professor Rebell has also lead counsel for plaintiffs in Cook versus McGee, a case that really sought to establish a right to education for capable citizens under the United States Constitution. You know that the U.S. Constitution, there's no right to education. Is that right? Talk about the Constitution and make sure that all of you have your Constitution. He's also the co-author of 6 books and dozens of articles on issues of law and education. Among his most recent works are Flunking Democracy, Schools, Courts, and Civic Participation, and Courts and Kids, Pursuing Educational Equity in the State Courts. I'm going to lastly say that Professor Rebell is a graduate of Harvard College and Yale Law School. So before passing the mic to our panelists, I just want to recognize Dr. Camp. Where are you? Dr. Matt Camp. He's going to make an announcement at the end about TC Take Action. So we just don't talk with you, we also provide opportunities for you to take some action during these challenging times. And to remind everybody that there is a reception at the program. But it takes a village to put this together, and I want to say a special thank you to my colleagues in the Vice President's Office for Diversity Affairs. And where are you? Raise your hands. Okay, thank you very much. As well as the Media Services, Columbia Dining, and TC Take Action, and the ODCA, and Disability Services. All right, turning it over for our conversation.
Okay, so I'll start with a little bit of the legal background here. So there's a lot going on, as you're probably aware, across the country of efforts to restrict teaching both in K-12 schools, in our colleges and universities, and teacher preparation programs. And by and large, these efforts are focused on restricting how and whether issues of race, gender, sexuality can be taught or discussed in classrooms, and broadly focused on general principles of equity, inclusion, diversity, words that sometimes we may think don't hold enough meaning, but in this case, those concepts are under attack. So this you can find on PEN America's website. It's an interactive map tracking all sorts of different laws and efforts to restrict education if you want to take a deeper dive. There's a lot going on, but today I want to focus on a subset of state statutes that attempt to restrict education and that are challenged, because I think these elucidate really the core constitutional problems with these laws and other efforts to restrict education. So I've cited here 3 cases that we're involved with and leading at the ACLU. Purnell v. Lamb, there's a companion case, NAVOA, that's challenging Florida's Stop Woke Act. The local 827 case out of New Hampshire, and then BERC v. O'Connor in Oklahoma. So those are the cases I'm going to focus on as examples here. I want to highlight at the outset that in each of these cases, federal courts have recognized significant constitutional concerns with these laws and moved to restrict or entirely block their enforcement. So these laws operate to ban concepts. They include a list that was first developed and made a part of law by a Trump administration executive order that restricted federal training. And this movement adopted and incorporated that to restrict the way that certain concepts can be taught in education. So just to look at Florida's law, for example, it will constitute a form of discrimination to subject a student to instruction that espouses, promotes, advances, I'm obviously paraphrasing here, any of these particular concepts. And you can see that these concepts are pretty broad. The idea that a member of a particular race is morally superior, that a person's moral character is determined by their race. There's other concepts here. I didn't put the whole list up, but that person should feel guilty based on their particular race, etc. So these are pretty abstract, broad ideas. They're concepts. How do these work in practice? Well, the main thing that they do is raise the specter of fear. They echo much of the rhetoric that's coming from politicians. They allow for a teacher to be disciplined for advancing a concept or teaching in a way that might cause a student to believe. So one of the key things they do is it's really difficult, particularly if you're a teacher developing your lesson plans, to try to think about what thing you might say in your class, what reading you might assign that might be construed to advance or compel a student to think in a certain way. And who decides this? It's reviewing bodies set up by these state political entities that pass these laws in the first place. And in many cases, in some cases, they allow for private lawsuits by individual citizens. And they put threats on institution-wide funding, further pressuring school districts, university systems to construe the law broadly and restrict what their teachers can teach. So what this results in is a broad chilling effect and fear about what can be said, how to teach, whether to raise these issues in classrooms or confront them when students raise them at all. And I have to note that the impacts here are felt disparately. These target particular ideas about race, about gender, and they're felt disparately by students of color, students LGBTQ and trans students, by similarly teachers in those classes, and those who are aligned with support. So there's a few ways that I want to highlight that these implicate constitutional rights. So the first is due process and vagueness. So all teachers, both K through 12 and college, have a right to fair notice of the rules under which that they could face discipline or negative consequences to their profession and their job. So a vague law violates due process rights because of two things. First, because it fails to give clear notice to teachers. So just like these laws, it's entirely impossible to understand when you might present something in a classroom that someone could construe to violate these laws. They're talking about broad and amorphous concepts that you cannot bring into the classroom. And then the second, equally and perhaps more important thing, is that they fail to give guidelines to those who enforce the law, which leaves them open to arbitrary and discriminatory enforcement. So those who have enforcement power will decide whether or not what you as a teacher taught in the classroom could be construed to make someone feel guilty because of their race, again, parents. So for example, in practice, in our Oklahoma lawsuit, we saw that the Oklahoma education body issued warnings to the Tulsa School District because their teacher trainings violated the law, not by anything that they included, not by anything that was shared with students, but in their design and spirit. So that's a particularly broad interpretation of how they intend to use this law. And I'll note again, that law has been read substantially more narrowly and preliminarily enjoined in large part. But I'll save that for any follow-up discussion. The next important body of rights are First Amendment rights. So college teachers or professors have a First Amendment right and freedom in their scholarship and teaching. This is connected with the concept of academic freedom. K through 12 teachers have a narrower set of personal First Amendment rights, but importantly, they don't shed those rights at the schoolhouse. And there are ways in which their First Amendment rights can still be implicated by these laws, particularly if they're speaking on private matters that are directly a part of the course, maybe material that they're offering. And then students have a First Amendment right to receive education. And this is the same legal idea behind questions of banning books in school libraries. The idea is that young people, in order to exercise their own First Amendment rights, need to have access to information and ideas to be able to formulate and articulate those rights. And so importantly, information can't be removed from curriculum or from a library for narrow partisan reasons. There must be a legitimate pedagogical reasoning justification. And then the next piece is First Amendment viewpoint discrimination. This is a particular take on First Amendment rights, most applicable in college context just because of rights are strongest. But one thing that these laws do is they prohibit certain viewpoints in speech and expression, but not others. So a common example that's been highlighted by courts in these cases, these laws would permit you to teach that affirmative action is a bad idea is a form of discrimination, but not to talk about why you might think that affirmative action is a good thing and a positive thing and consistent with law. So that's really at the core and anathema to the First Amendment and the idea in America that robust speech and discussion is critical to our democracy. One of the examples in our Florida case that the state conceded to before the court was that under their view of the law, the state could require college professors to adopt their line in curriculum and forbid them from ever criticizing the state government in a college classroom. So I think that shows sort of the extent to which they're taking the arguments and their concept of how they want to shape education. So I spoke about the First Amendment right to receive information on behalf of students, and this is where I want to leave things off. So again, the ability to ascertain or to obtain information is critical for students to be able to formulate and express their own ideas. This really intersects with many of the ways, as was said, there's not a right to education in the federal Constitution, but we know that education is really critical for people to be able to exercise their rights, to participate fully in civil society. And so this concept in these cases intersects more broadly with that viewpoint of education as part of our constitutional system. So when we're thinking concretely about how states or schools can address curriculum consistent with this, what is a legitimate pedagogical objective? These might be standards for research, so how you conduct research, when is research at the college level considered to meet the standards of a professional practice. They're developed by the practice itself, they're objective and not focused on the particular land on. Or in K through 12 education, this might be a school district adopting a particular approach to teaching math, age-appropriate approach to subject matter, things like this, but not just, we don't like this idea and you're not allowed to speak it in the classroom. So in Oklahoma, in our lawsuit, in particularly when we argued this claim, we relied on the academic standards for social studies developed by Oklahoma educators and leaders, which in fact directly contradict what the law requires for teachers in the classroom. It talks about, and it's based in educational research, why it is important and valuable for students to be able to confront difficult ideas like our country's history of racism, to talk fully and frankly about these issues in their classroom and with a teacher to guide them through it. And so we were able to directly call on this professional standard to argue that Oklahoma's law fails to adhere to legitimate pedagogical basis for how curriculum should be shaped in the classroom. So I just want to end on that note, I think, and hand it over. But as I mentioned, and I just want to stress, each of these laws that I'm talking about has been significantly enjoined by the federal courts. So we are fighting back and find the laws stand up, although of course the
I think I just turned it off. Okay, I got it back on. So thank you very much for that really powerful overview of these laws and what the ACLU do to try to counter them. What I'd like to focus on, since we're at Teachers College, is the impact of these laws in K-12 education. A lot that's going on in the cases that Sarah mentioned has to do with higher education. And even though I know you've got a difficult row to hoe in convincing especially the upper appeals courts to enjoin these laws, I think you and the other plaintiffs have had more success at the college level than in making arguments for teachers and for students. at the high school or K to 12 level. And it's really interesting when you think about it. I mean, Sarah's grappling with the First Amendment, the 14th Amendment in the U.S. Constitution, and I will say, for reasons that we don't have time to get in here, trying to navigate First Amendment and 14th Amendment cases through the federal courts in general is much more difficult today than it was a few years ago. But in this area, the real stumbling block when you talk about K to 12 education is that we've got a very well-established principle, a policy principle, a political principle, and a legal principle in this country that local school boards have a lot of say over curriculum, over library books, and things in the classroom when it comes to elementary and high schools. And there's a lot of law that says the school board can reflect community values and can make sure that the community values are adopted in the curriculum, in the books in the library. So you're going up against that if you're challenging decisions from the school board. And of course, the school board gets its authority from the state legislature. So if the state legislature has told the school boards, you know, you have to have this in the curriculum and you can't have that, it's a very big hurdle. And it's a political hurdle as well as a legal hurdle, because people say the legislature, the school board has the right to do this. So if we have time, I'm sure Sarah and Sonya will get into more specifics about how this plays out, both legally and from a curriculum point of view. But I'm going to veer a little from what Janice said in introducing this. I know this is Constitution Day for the U.S. Constitution, but I want to talk to you about state constitutions, because for me, in the area of education reform, state constitutions are where the action is in current times. In particular, I don't know if you're all aware of this. I know people who take my classes are well aware of it. But there's been an astounding body of law that's been built up in the state courts over the past 50 years or so in education adequacy and fair funding cases. And we've had litigations in 48 out of the 50 states. 60% of them found for plaintiffs. And they found that kids have a right under the state constitution for an adequate education or a thorough and efficient education, different language in the different constitutions. But the essence of that right, just about every one of these courts has said, is the right to be well prepared to be a capable citizen in our democratic society. So that's where I think there is a very strong legal position and political position to challenge some of these laws that we're talking about. And Sarah indicated that there are interesting ways you can try to craft First Amendment arguments around students have a right to receive certain information. We can go to the core a lot more in the state court arguments and say they have a right to a good civic preparation, a good civic education. And to get a good civic education, you need to be able to discuss all kinds of issues in the classroom, and in particular, controversial issues. You know, Janice mentioned I've written a whole book about flunking democracy, all the problems with civic education in our country, how poorly it's being taught. And for that reason, we're trying to push these state courts that have defined the purpose of education as preparing kids for capable citizenship to say civic education has to be a priority, not be the neglected subject area that it's been for the last 50 years. And in pushing what civic education is, we emphasize two major aspects. There are a lot of aspects. I mean, if you read my book, we talk about to be well educated, you've got to have civic knowledge, how the government works, history and all. You've got to have civic skills. Among those skills is media literacy, to understand how to distinguish correct from incorrect information. You've got to have civic experiences in actually seeing how the government works, attending city council meetings, taking part in community action programs. And you've got to have respect for civic values, democratic values, et cetera. To develop a lot of this knowledge, skills, and experiences, you've got to know how to have democratic discussions, deliberations, debates. The essence, therefore, of civic education is getting good information, being able to distinguish accurate from inaccurate information, and being able to conduct good discussions with people with whom you don't agree. That's what we do in a democracy. We're getting away from it, unfortunately, in our modern political polarized society. But the essence of what schools should be teaching to prepare kids for democracy is to be able to have a respectful conversation with people with whom you don't agree. Now, these anti-woke are standing directly in the face of that, because they're saying, no, don't go near the controversial issues. You stay safe. Only look at this part of the issue. You don't look at that part of the issue. I mean, it's quite crazy. So it's great that the ACLU is directly challenging these laws, but I want to tell you it's a much deeper problem than that. I mean, here in New York, we can say, okay, we're not Florida, we're not Texas. We don't have these terrible anti-woke laws that are saying specifically you can't talk about this racial issue, you can't talk about that gender issue. But we have a lot of local practices that have been built up in the years where people didn't respect what teaching kids how to be a capable citizen is. And the Brookings Institute did a recent survey of states where they don't have the laws, and found that 50% of teachers say that they don't teach controversial issues because they don't want to get involved in it. And they had a subset of 40 communities in the most liberal areas, probably areas many of us live in. 40% of those teachers said they won't teach controversial subjects because they don't want the headache with it. It's permeated the culture. There's a chilling effect. People read that there's an anti-woke law in Florida, and it affects teachers in New York or in Massachusetts, and it affects parents in those places. And we do have certain organized parent groups that'll come to a school board meeting in the Northeast or the Pacific Coast and stir up things. And even if they don't get the school board or the local legislature to change the policy, they change the atmosphere. So this is a huge problem. It goes beyond the states that have these laws. I'll just give you one example of what's going on and what we're trying to do about it through litigation based on state constitutions. I've been very involved for the last year or two in the state of Kentucky, all kinds of reasons why we picked Kentucky. But anyway, they have a very strong right to education that's been established for decades. Great court decision from 1989 that says an adequate education has 7 different capacities. At least 3 of them are fundamentally civics. Those are the first 3, that kids have to learn civic skills, economic and political values, et cetera, et cetera. That is not going on in most Kentucky schools. They don't have an exact anti-woke law like Florida law in Kentucky. They have a modified anti-woke law. It's interesting, in the border states and all, this stuff seeps in. So I'll just read you one paragraph here. They don't say you can't discuss racial issues, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, they say you have to read Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail. You have to read Brown v. Board of Education. But they have little insidious things like you must teach, quote, personal agency and the understanding that regardless of one's circumstances, an American has the ability to succeed when he or she is given sufficient opportunity and is committed to seizing the opportunity through hard work, pursuit of education, and good citizenship. So Kentucky teachers are mandated to teach that the American dream is still alive, and if you work hard, you can achieve all kinds of things. Now, I happen to believe that there is merit to the idea of the American dream. At least it's a vision that should inspire our schools to do a better job and prepare people and all. But this is basically saying somebody who is a critic of the American dream and how it's playing out and how it's not working in our society is going to have a problem with this law, with the supervisors in the school, et cetera. So it's not saying you can't teach CRT, but teach positive American values as we understand them. That is not teaching for a democracy, because I think the latest statistic I saw was something like 52% of the people believe in the American dream. So that means 48% don't believe. There's a good debate there, but you can't have that debate if you're in a school in Kentucky, because you have to say the American dream is alive and well, and it's great. You don't have absolutely prohibitions in those schools, but I'll tell you, we've had public engagement hearings around the whole state for the last year with students, teachers, et cetera. I have not found one teacher that says he or she is teaching controversial issues, because there's a huge chill just from this kind of language. They get the message. They get the message from their supervisors. Don't go there. You know, it was controversial to get this modest language. They started with some of the language from Florida, and, you know, there were all kinds of good debates in the legislature, and they came down with this watered-down version. But everybody knows that, and they don't want to risk it. So what can we do about it? Well, we're going to try the state court litigation path to complement what ACLU and others are doing in the federal courts. And we're planning a case that we're going to file in a couple of months that, among other things, is going to say that you're violating the state constitution because at least 3 out of 7 capacities for what an adequate education is has to do with civics, and you're not teaching civics if you're not emphasizing controversial issues. Our Democracy Ready Coalition, which operates in the state of New York, we've also been trying to take action there. We're not planning a case in New York because, quite frankly, the state education department understands us and they're working with us and trying to push these things. But we got the State School Boards Association, which is a member of our coalition, to put out a guidance document to all their administrators and teachers and say that you have to be proactive on saying teaching controversial issues, debates in the classroom is an important part of civics. So they put out a bulletin to their members. How many of their members follow it? We haven't done a follow-up, but the 700 school districts in New York State have been getting a lot of background information about how important this is. So both on the policy level and the legal level, I think it's important to push this not only in the states that have these anti-war laws on the books, but it is a national problem, and it's a national problem that hits home right here in New York, where we think we're totally liberal. Everything's hunky-dory. We don't have all those problems Florida has, but we do have them.
Good evening, and thank you to Sarah and Michael for those that really informative summary of what's happening at both the federal and the state levels. I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the work that the Black Education Research Center has been doing here at TC, which I think is kind of serving at our existence in a lot of ways, is serving as a way to kind of push back and also be very clear about, you know, what it is that I think many Americans believe in and want to see as it relates to our educational system. Very quickly, I just wanted to acknowledge our team who does a lot of really important work. We're working at the center to improve educational outcomes and opportunities for children of African descent throughout the world, of course focused here on the US, and are really seeking to use research to inform policy and practice. Is really the primary thrust of what we're doing. And we see no better time than now to use the university and the research and scholarship that we generate as a way to educate the public and to mobilize constituencies to advocate for the type of education that they see. Dr. Kant wanted maps of the state and those that have considered or passed parents' rights and education bills in 2024. I also want to thank Dr. Ann Labou, who's here, who helped me with preparing this presentation. She has done some really important work around school boards and leadership for equity, and so I encourage you to read more about that. In terms of the parents' rights, after more than 10 states enacted these bills in 2022 and 2023, we've seen the pace of the adoption fortunately slow up this year. But this actually also facilitated the increased number of book bans. There was actually one woman, I can't remember how many of the book bans she was responsible for, but there was one very active parent who was responsible for that. So I think, again, it's important to realize that the role of activism can work in many ways, and I'm encouraging us to, again, think about the things that we want to see and demand from our policymakers and be very clear about what that is. As I mentioned, the parents' rights bills really helped to facilitate the number of books that were banned, and again, you can see great variation across the states. Fortunately, we've seen this slow down a bit as well, but it is very concerning, again, when we think about the content that our children have access to being banned and what it means more largely for education and democracy. In terms of the anti-DEI legislation in 2024, we have seen this in 24 states and become law in 8 states this year. And the Congress has also considered 10 anti-DEI bills so far this year. And so we found that there's been 76 bills targeting diversity, equity, and inclusion in education. And I think, again, it's another example of how we have to be very strategic and clear about what it is that we're demanding from our policymakers and engaging in democratic practice to make that known, because it does work. If you organize and you meet with your legislators and advance legislation, you can be effective in making change. And so what we have done at BERC is really focused on an agenda that I continue to put this up in front of individuals everywhere we go, because it's basically the findings from a COVID study that we conducted in 2021 to better understand how Black communities were experiencing COVID as it relates to education, and then also wanting to get a sense of the recommendations and the things and ways in which they felt that education could be transformed, not only for Black students, but for all students. And so you can see here a lot of the themes that have been touched on and that we will continue to take up as a center as it relates to protecting and defending the rights of students to have access to a safe and appropriate education, to ensure that we're investing in mental health supports by way of therapists, social workers, and other in-school support staff, and making sure that we're also training and preparing them to do that work. To provide professional learning to practicing teachers and leaders to meet the academic, social, and emotional learning of students. And I'm going to give an example of how we've been able to do that work here in New York City. Also modernizing and updating curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment. And so thinking about, again, the ways in which the content that we're delivering and the ways that we do it. And so you can see how there's a direct kind of relationship between what many policymakers who don't want us to teach the truth or don't want us to teach about certain concepts or experiences are attacking, and how we are really trying to address those things in terms of finding ways that we can reach the needs of students who may be culturally diverse or have different ways of the other is to invest in the preparation, cultivation, and mentoring of culturally relevant educators. And so culturally relevant education has definitely taken, has taken the term, and its application has definitely generated interest in the education community. But the question remains, how do you become a culturally relevant educator? And what do you need to do to make sure that what you are preparing for children is culturally relevant and meets their specific needs? And so again, while there has been a call to equity and culturally relevant education, I think we're still trying to find the ways in which we prepare individuals and educators to do that. So even though you may be enthusiastic about equity, if you have legislation in your state that's telling you that you cannot talk about certain topics and you're not getting access to training or information that's going to help you to do that, you can see how it can be really difficult for our students to actually end up getting the type of information and knowledge that they have a First Amendment right to receive. And then finally, engaging Black students, families, educators, researchers, and community leaders as experts and equal partners in equity and justice work. And so this, again, and my call to this group and others is to really organize at the local level and to make sure that those who are your activists, educators, parents, and those who are concerned about these issues find ways to mobilize and then find ways to make those interests known to your local elected officials, superintendents, school board members, and others who can actually make decisions that will support. And so I want to spend most of my time talking about the work that we've done around the Black Studies curriculum here in New York City Public Schools. How many are you aware now, Black Studies?
The $5 meal deal at
So
McDonald's
we have been working
means
for
you
3
get to pick
years
between a
with a
McDouble or
coalition
a
of
McChicken.
organizations here in New York City
Then
to
get a
develop this
small fry,
curriculum. I want to acknowledge
a
Deirdre
small
Holman,
drink,
who on our team really
and
led
a
this
four-piece
effort up in the
McNuggets.
last year in particular,
That's a
and
lot
was
of
able to develop
McDonald's for not a lot of money.
a pre-K-12
Get the
interdisciplinary
$5
comprehensive
meal
Black
deal
Studies curriculum for
today.
New York City. And I think it's, now that we've kind of come back up for air, after the last 3 years, are really kind of amazed and very proud of the work that's been done. Because in many ways, this curriculum and the work that we'll be doing to support teachers and administrators to implement it into their schools, to me, is the work that is equity work. It requires transformation at almost every level of the system. And so whether it's working directly with school superintendents to kind of think about how and to what extent they want to implement the curriculum in their districts, in working with building principals who may have some parents that are very excited about it, and others who may be kind of questioning or concerned about whether or not their students should or why they need to have Black studies in their school. This project and the different questions that that bubbled up for us throughout the process, I think, has taught us so much about what it does take to engage in systems level change and educational transformation. And I think that it really does require, as we go forward and think about the type of educational systems that we want to see in this country, how we bridge the research, policy, and practice communities in ways where we are able to align with those who have the same vision of education as we do, and use the different levers and resources that we have in our respective communities to make that happen. So for example, now that this curriculum has been developed, we've received interest from other districts across the country on how we do that work. And you realize that every time you enter another community, it's important to do the mapping, to understand who the key stakeholders are, and to try to figure out how you can work within that system to create a curriculum or to even create different resources that students and families can have access to. So there is the leadership question around how you develop curriculum, what's going to be appropriate in light of the policies and laws that are that states are now implementing to ban and limit teaching this information. You then have the questions about how to prepare your teachers at the building level in terms of professional learning and development around the topics. And it's around a topic that many of us did not have access to in our own K-12 education system. So I think this exciting thing is that we will have our students and young people who will be very much a part of co-leading the teaching of various lessons, and that through that and the development of our young people, that over time we're going to have a generation and cadre of young scholars who have access to a curriculum that will transform not only their understanding of themselves, their fellow community members, but also, I think, give them the tools and knowledge to be able to create and sustain the type of democratic society we're kind of talking about today. So I encourage you, if you haven't had a chance to access the curriculum, we're very fortunate in that it's publicly available through the We Teach New York City website. And we're really spending this year working directly with educators on the ground to, again, provide information and coaching around the lessons. We had an amazing summer conference in July where we had about 100 educators who were just so enthusiastic and passionate about making sure that their students have access to this and that they're equipped to teach this fall. So we asked you all to spread the word. We know that there have been a lot of curriculum projects with New York City Public Schools in the past, and that it really takes a grassroots effort to help mobilize and educate people on what's available. And so that is what we're going to be spending a lot of our time doing this year, and working directly with districts through research practice partnerships, through professional learning and coaching. And I just want to say that as we approach the election season, that at the end of the day, what happens at the ballot box is so critically important. Because as you can see, the people that you put in office have a lot of power and control of what happens to our schools, particularly at the state level. And so although we oftentimes are focused on the national elections. It's also very important to understand and think about the legislators who represent you, what their policy platforms are that relates to education, and also to the extent that you can, building those relationships and connections to have the ear of legislators, because that's really the way that you can make change in policy. And so as W.P. Du Bois asked, the power of the ballot we need in sheer defense, else what shall save us from a second slavery? And so as we think about Black education in particular, and education that is inclusive for all students, we see kind of the seeds of fascism, right, that are playing out here. And I get concerned because it feels like we're getting desensitized to what is happening to us by way of disinformation and misinformation. But we must stay vigilant and make sure that, again, we're supporting those who are fighting for these policies to be changed, and that we're supporting our educators because they have a very difficult task in front of them. And so I think as part of our conversation, we'll talk about how we can support researchers and our teachers in this moment. And I just encourage you to stay connected to us at BERC because, again, we are excited about the curriculum being rolled out this year and what we're going to learn about the extent to which that curriculum does provide increased educational opportunities and improved outcomes for students.
Just real quick, I just want to thank our panel again for taking the time to enlighten us. So please can we get a big, big round of applause. And it's just a reminder of there's so many fronts to do the work, whether we're doing it through education, through our legal work, through our advocacy, and all fronts are important. So we're going to open the floor for some Q&A from the audience. There's some mic here, and I'm going to place this one on the corner as well if anyone wants to go to that side. And then we'll leave some time for Matt Camp to make.
Thanks, panel. The question I have is more about, I'm sorry, my name is Jacoby Youngblood. I'm a third year in the History and Education program, PhD student. And I've taken Professor Rebell. And we've had some spirited debates. But the question I have is, and I put this in the registration form, how do we see these issues showing up differently in the realm of private education and the issues around privatization versus these issues that are more so over, well, state governments have oversight over public schools, or is there a blur between that? I just want to know from you all's experiences how you're seeing this issue or these issues show up for the private school community and the public school community, and what impact of that.
Since I said I've got a background in state laws, I've got to handle that at first. Most of the issues that we're talking about are issues of state law. So the question of how much regulation a legislature in a state imposes on private schools as against public schools varies from state to state. In New York, for instance, private school teachers don't need to be certified. The curriculum is not closely monitored. They don't have to take regents exams and all. So it's not as closely monitored. I don't know the extent to which that might be true in Florida or some other states. At the higher ed level, there is a lot more scope for independent curriculum and book choice in private schools than I think in public schools. The reason the anti-woke laws are so powerful in a place like Florida is that they're mainly affecting the public universities. But you may have more to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true in terms of private schools being more isolated from the threats through, state legislatures, certainly, and more able to shape their own policies around this. I think, though, it is not surprising that the same political movements that are advancing these types of restrictions on curriculum also have platforms, and there's folks who've traced the funding as well, who are interested in privatization of education. in the US. So one of the things that these types of restrictions on curriculum do is to undermine trust in the education system, and to feel that the education system is, divided, untrustworthy, that parents need to be skeptical and scrutinize what their teachers, what their students are learning in schools. Or if you don't want to go to a state college where teachers are prohibited from criticizing the state's government or governor, you can choose a private school. And I think that those who advance this curriculum would also be fine with this pushing people towards choosing private education, where you can pick and choose which viewpoints or values you want your education system to advance. So this also goes back to the point that this is a critical issue for the idea of democracy and the idea that a public education system is important for our society more.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm Olivia Jinghui Lee, and I'm a second year at Columbia Law School. I'm very interesting. Today's conference is so good. I know that I know that you do a lot of educations, laws, cases, and also one of the reports you recently wrote is about SFFA, and you propose a laws approach such as reducing the standard test as one of the decisions for the admissions, and you propose over 10 approaches. Which one you think is the most practical one, and which one you think is the most important approaches that we should enforce on?
Yeah, so just to repeat, the question is about the Supreme Court's decision last term in the SFFA case, ruling that the affirmative action consideration of race in college admissions by many colleges was unconstitutional. So what can schools do now? So there is a report by the ACLU and a coalition of other advocacy groups that goes into this and lays out a range of approaches. I think that I'm not sure that any one approach will work on its own. So I think that schools have to be looking holistically and really carefully at their admissions process, their ability to recruit students, how their evaluation practices impact different students. But then also I think, and what ties into what's happening with programs at colleges in particular for this now, is it's really important to also look at attracting and retaining students through curriculum, programs, resources that are available at the schools themselves. And I think that's a huge part of it. So actually what we need is more attention and investment to having curriculum, courses, programs and services that students can engage with, that makes college look like a realistic and viable option, something that is there to serve them and meet them with their own interests as well, I think is a really important part of it.
I'd just like to add to that, with the approach that emphasizes the right to civic education in the state courts, it's one way around SFFA that we're working on, because another part of a good civic preparation is you got to be prepared for an increasingly diverse society, and segregated schools can't do that. So there should be a premium on getting well integrated, racial balance, ethnic balance, religious, sexual orientation, whatever. We should have schools that are diverse as possible. And if you look under the state constitutional perspective, we take the position that schools have an affirmative obligation to promote this kind of diversity balance as much as possible. Well, does that come up against the Supreme Court, which does have the ultimate say when it comes to racial discrimination as they define it in SFFA and other cases. What the current Supreme Court done, they basically reversed the understanding going back to integration cases in the 70s that you could use numerical guidelines. They've made it very difficult to use any kind of numerical guidelines for diversity. But we're taking a position that schools have to find ways around that. And it's the kinds of things Sarah's talking about, recruitment techniques, with the way you draw attendance zones and all. Those things are known, but they're not actively, proactively pursued by most school districts, school boards. And the position I take is, under the state constitution, you have an obligation to do that. Whether that will prevail, we'll have to see. I don't know.
I guess I'm just processing pro-integration policies in a moment like that, especially for communities of color. I think we ask a lot of our communities of color because there's mixed research on the impact of school desegregation on students. And so, you know, I have so many thoughts going through my head in this moment, because it really can be an opportunity for us to, as a lot of the systems are falling apart, to really think about what we want this country to look like, and then determine what type of educational systems, or what educational systems need to look like to be able to create that future for our country. And I think that's the struggle that we're in, quite frankly. And I think sometimes I fear that the right better understands the power of education and schools as places of socialization, and of transmitting and supporting a certain set of cultural values, right? They're very clear on that in terms of what they feel is unsafe or inappropriate for their children. And we have to have at least the same, if not even more, energy toward a strategy on how we then demand what we know, especially as researchers, is important and necessary for children to have access to that type of education. So I think these conversations, you know, they're helpful, obviously, to kind of, again, understand the landscape. But my question becomes, you know, where is the Calvary? And, you know, is there a way, if things are so dire? Because I remember being in this room, I guess probably, I don't know, during the Trump administration. I mean, we were all, you know, kind of struggling a little bit in terms of this feeling that the country was, you know, moving in a direction that we didn't want to see it move in. People even talking about leaving, you know, the United States. But yet and still, I see us here in 2024, and we have these conversations, and we're in the middle of a war around the minds of our children. And, you know, my hope is that we will come up with, again, strategies to mobilize the research, policy, and practice communities to use what we have to create and design a new vision, you know, to, as Danielle Allen writes about, you know, we have to design democracy reform in a lot of ways. And so I think there's just so many pieces to it. The pandemic, you know, there was a lot of talk about us doing things differently. I think inertia has just taken us right back to trying to get back to where things were, because we're familiar with that. But my hope is that we really will be more creative and brave even in articulating what it is that we believe our schools should be doing and providing for our young people. We pay taxes. So, you know, we have the right to be very clear about what it is that we want. So I'm hoping that we will use like this moment and others to take action by sharing what it is that we want, not always being in a position of feeling vulnerable or, I think, threatened by what others who don't want inclusive education, but finding a way to build up our own capacities, to stand together, to be very clear about what we expect our schools to look like and how that will help to facilitate and sustain the type of country that we want.
Thanks so much. Let's hear it for our outstanding panel. The really extraordinary work that you're all doing. Thank you so much for grounding us and providing research and evidence what the current status of this situation is. Could we go back a couple slides, actually just before the welcome on Dr. Douglas' slide, if that's possible? Before the welcome. Sorry, just before the thank you, sorry. There's a couple QR codes she had, I think. Yep. So as we're finding that, TC take, first of all, Matt Camp, I'm Director of Government Relations and Community Engagement. So I'm TC's lead person to talk to government, city, state, and federal levels. And we do community building throughout the college and ways of taking action to write your legislator. So instead of just me or President Bailey talking to our legislators, it's you also. So TC Take Action provides nonpartisan ways to get involved in the policy process. Now, this is the fun part, to take out our phones and check out these bills. So thank you again, Dr. Douglas, for providing these links. Let's grab a QR code. There we go. And this will take us to the list of bills. Who's from New York, by the way? Okay, so maybe about a third or a quarter, so people from other places. So these bills are happening all over the country, and really important here is to find if there's a pending bill in your home state and take note of that bill number. And what we're going to do is write to our legislators, and this is an opportunity to write whatever your perspective is. We're, as a 501c3 nonprofit, not allowed to tell you what to write or how to say it, but we are providing an educational opportunity to weigh in. So scan through those bills, take a couple minutes to find any bill that is of interest, and you could also just open up a tab and save it for later. So basically, I think we're ready to go to the slides I had
In
earlier.
2024, the
If you don't
stakes
mind.
and average global temperature have never been
Okay.
higher.
This is
Turn
the
your
opportunity to
anxiety
share
into
your
action
story.
with Pod
So
America.
just so you know where we're coming from here,
Never miss an
as the
episode.
panelists have all mentioned, writing to your legislator makes a difference. There's a peer-reviewed article that you might find interesting called Call Your Legislator by Bergman and Cole, I believe her name is, from a few years ago, that shows it only takes a few phone calls or emails to your legislator to actually move the needle, especially at the local level. I used to work for 2 different US senators opening up those emails and phone calls and faxes, and there wasn't even Twitter back then as carrier pigeon messages and stuff. Everything, all of those things, we logged into a central database and shared it with the legislator, and it mattered. The senator actually wanted to know what the constituents were thinking and feeling. So this link will take you to our voter voice platform, which is a kind of a blank canvas for you to type in your name and address if you're so inclined, and it will automatically find your legislator. So we had about a quarter or a third of people from New York, all the other states, wherever you're located throughout the 50 states, as Michael, repeated. All this, a lot of this stuff is at the state and local level. So that will pull up your legislator, and you can type your message now or whenever it's convenient. So while we have a second, any questions about this exercise or how this works? Has anybody written to their legislator before about any other shit? Okay, great. A few people have done, more than a few. So people have done that. This is that muscle memory. This is exercising your civic muscle. So again, feel free to do it now. We could chat more in reception. I won't hold you back from that. Or just save this for later. The website is right there for you. Okay, the next slide, please. This is another really important thing in exercising our voice and our democracy is getting ready for the election. So we're here to help. Myself, Lauren Duncan, and Maddie are also here on the government relations team. And we'll help you get ready to vote. So sign up for Thursday afternoon. There's a virtual workshop we're holding with the All In Campus Democracy Challenge. Has anybody heard of that group? And maybe their undergrad institutions? This is a group that is also nonprofit, nonpartisan, that helps college and university students get ready for the election. So all kinds of ways to register to vote, absentee, questions, navigating the whole process. Sometimes it's harder than we think it should be. But that's on Thursday afternoon. So we hope to see you all there. And that's all I got. So thank you so much for your time and see you soon.
Thank you, Matt. Before we close, very quickly, just thank you all. And before I say what an astounding group we've had here, and the work that they're doing is so intense and broad and deep. And so, yes, they get to talk with us, but the reality is there's so much going on in their lives to get this work done for them to come here and be with us. So I just a round of applause for them. I don't want to do this, but I'm going to acknowledge President Bailey, who's in the room. Come on, stand up. Just say thank you for spending the time with us. And I'm going to embarrass our Office of General Counsel because many of them are here. Raise your hand. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here and being part of our community and being supportive. And of course, there's Tom Rock, Dr. Tom Rock over there from Student Affairs. I can't thank them. Or the Cal. We're there with you, and we're going to keep going. So where we're going to go is to Everett Lounge. There is a reception for you all. All right? Thank you.